what can be more adequate to say about debilitated Saturn? That it is less powerful in its malefic nature, and therefore one would have less difficulties, or it is less powerful in its good nature. And this person goes on to say, I can't help it. I can only think of Saturn as a good planet. Like after being sedentary for a period, we have pain in the muscle after working out. It hurts, but we know it is good, is for a good reason, and in our best interest. And what about debilitated Saturn joined by exalted Sun and own home Mars and Rahu all in the same house? So I'm assuming this is related to the first question. And this individual, they think about Saturn as being particularly good, I imagine, because, yes, they have Saturn in a Yuva of Ashta in its own home, which is going to tend to make a person like Saturn a bit more, generally speaking. But the question is, it's a very good question. When we're thinking about malefic planets and what they do, when we have a exalted Saturn, and that exalted Saturn rules over a difficult house, it can be more likely that that exalted Saturn has more powerful to make the person feel really bad and really difficult, because it's ruling over a difficult house, which means that the things that it rules over as that house lord are more difficult. So getting, I'm trying to think of a good example here, getting an exalted Saturn in, say, the 8th house. So an exalted Saturn in the 8th house. On some level, since Saturn is a Karaka for the 8th house, that can help to strengthen one's longevity. But when we have Saturn ruling over the 12th in that situation, going into the 8th, and the 12th is a difficult house, that can have a person having a lot more expenses on the result of preserving their longevity. They still have longevity, but there's more expensive preserving that longevity because that power of that 12th house is stronger. So it really comes down to, and I think this will make a lot more sense when we get into the yogas and the yogas course, which is the 3rd course in the 2nd year of the apprenticeship program, which we're actually going to be starting here in about a little less than a month. That's where we'll start to see, is a malefic planet strong and in good dignity with good Shambhala? Is that going to be something we really want in our lives or not? And oftentimes it comes down to, it's based upon what is the other houses that it rules. For example, having the 6th Lord Saturn debilitated, 6th Lord, will that even work? Let's see. So if we've got Virgo, that'll be 6th Lord debilitated. That could potentially show a person who has a greater capacity to overcome their enemies. So in that regard, well then, the debilitation of the Saturn would be helpful. So it really depends. It depends on the situation. Okay, so let's get back to that question, make sure I'm speaking to it all. And like you mentioned that you think of Saturn as a good planet. It really depends on how a person has worked with Saturn, how they're willing to work with Saturn. If you take person number 1 and you say, in order to build a successful business, you have to get up at 5 a.m. every day and come home at 11 o'clock every night to take care of all of the things that are required to be a millionaire. You have to do all those things, the hard work, the tedious things that are boring as hell. You have to do all those things. You say that to person number 1, you say that to person number 2. Person with a more beneficially placed Saturn, possibly ruling over good houses for the individual, being in a trinal house possibly for the individual. That person says, that's excellent. You're telling me I can be a millionaire in 5 years if I slave for that 5-year period of time doing this tedious work? Well, that's worth it. I'm going to do it. But you get person number 2 who you tell that exact same thing to, and Saturn doesn't rule over a positive house, or Saturn is in a difficult situation, and they're going to pull out their hair and say, what do you mean in order to be a millionaire, I have to work that hard? Can't it just come to me? So it depends on the individual, which means it often depends upon the ascendant. And that's why on my YouTube channel right now, I'm doing a series on how the planets function for each ascendant. It's going to take me a long time to get through that, but if you listen to that, it'll give you some clearer ideas. And then, of course, the apprenticeship students who are participating in the yogas course that's coming up soon, the year 2 course, you also get a lot of this information. So I think you just haven't got there yet. And the follow-up question, what about a debilitated Saturn joined by an exalted Sun, an own home Mars, and Rahu all in the same house? Well, you know that is a Lajatati Avashta for what? So let me list it again. Those of you who've already taken the Planetary States and Relationships course in the Astrological Apprenticeship Program, if you have Saturn debilitated, let's just stick Saturn, Sun, Mars, and Rahu together. What Avashta is that? Okay, it's a shamed Avashta, Lajita Avashta. So knowing what you know about Shadbala, because those of you who've taken the first course in the Astrological Apprenticeship course, year 2, knowing that we've got a strong Shadbala impacting this debilitated Saturn from these other planets, what kind of experience do you think that's going to give to that Saturn? Yeah, it'll be starved, which means are they going to, how well are they going to be able to accomplish the goals of Saturn? How well are they going to be able to tap into, what Saturn needs to do to be successful? And to follow up with that, what does that mean? So those of you who've taken this course, if Saturn is being shamed by Sun, by Mars, adding that Rahu in there, generally speaking, psychologically, how's that person going to function related to what Saturn represents? And tell me what Saturn represents, meaning like, don't just say Saturn's not going to function very well. What aspects of the person's life aren't going to function very well? And again, this is for any of you who've taken the Planetary States and the Vashtas course. And I see there are a few of you here. Yeah, difficulty persisting through difficulties. That's a good one. Anything else? Difficulty related to work, long-term issues, fears. Authorities will make it difficult to persist, and that's because the Sun is involved here. Their ability to deal with their problems is impacted, and we know that because from the Shadbala course, we learned that the 2 planets that help us deal with our problems, either short-term Mars or long-term Saturn, when they've got difficulty, you can't deal with those problems in that way. Self-esteem issues, another Saturn-related thing. So yeah, so when we think about this question, which is having a debilitated Saturn, which means it doesn't have much of its capacity to achieve its agendas, and we're sticking it with an exalted Sun and an own home Mars, which are going to have a lot of capacity, and we stick it with Rahu, which is what makes it the ashamed Avashta itself. This is where Saturn's getting hammered, and this is why it's important to realize that oftentimes the problems that we have with Saturn are not necessarily Saturn's fault. It's because we have these other planets getting in the way of Saturn being able to achieve its goals, such as enduring long-term problems, moving through issues even though our self-esteem is being attacked, ignoring authority figures that want to keep us back or oppress us. You know, these are things that Saturn does. That's why Saturn is the ruler of the common people of democracy. It's not about monarchy. It's not about rulership. It's about overcoming those kinds of qualities. So yes, that's pretty good. Excellent. Well, moving on. But the other qualities, Sun and Mars, doesn't what? What's the rest of that statement? Help to counterbalance. It doesn't help to counterbalance the impact to Saturn. So it doesn't help to counterbalance the impact to what Saturn rules over and what Saturn's karmas are. That Sun and Mars might give the individual themselves. And again, this is where it comes down to the specifics of the chart. I know you gave me the birth chart here, but I don't really want to get into birth chart readings. I just want to stick to the principles. So if Saturn rules over the ascendant, which is a personal indicator, then yes, all the self-esteem issues and so on are going to be very much in the person's awareness. But let's say instead that this chart is a Leo ascendant, and then we have Leo ruled over by the Sun and the ascendant Lord exalted. And if it's a Leo ascendant, then that Sun is going to be exalted in the 9th house. And Saturn will be ruling over the 6th and the 7th, which represents other people and our enemies, which would show that the real problem then isn't for the individual. The real problem is because this person has an extremely strong capacity to lead and to rule. And so then they dominate their enemies and they dominate their partners and so on. So we can see that when we talk about questions like this, it always comes back to, well, what is the rest of the chart? Because that it depends on what does that Saturn rule over. It depends on what that Sun rules over. So always, when you're thinking about things like the Lajita of Ashta, again, something that we need to cover in another section, it's always going to have to do with how is the chart set up. So an ashamed Saturn is going to work very differently for a Leo ascendant than it's going to work for a Aquarius or a Capricorn ascendant. Does this make sense what I'm saying here? You all understand the principle? Okay, good.